it probably will confuse some people or shock some people to say that I'm not shocked that this has happened. For a very, very long time, I've been saying that if we hear toxic debates and hateful words, then eventually they inspire people to commit violence. And that's what we've seen today. And we've seen from the manifesto that was published by the terrorist that he was inspired by events from around the world, including hateful writings and words from people in the United Kingdom.
And I want to go straight to Baroness Warsi, but firstly by welcoming you to Friday Night Live, and Jazakallah khair for your time. I know you're a very busy lady. Great to have you on the show this evening. And I know Baroness Sayeeda Warsi, that you have been saying for years that Islamophobia is rife, endemic. I know you've been calling it out within your own Conservative Party for a long time. But the truth is, and what we're hearing from multiple guests today, that this hatred actually spans the political and the class divide, and the politicians are almost getting away with it with impunity. I mean, firstly, your reflections on the events of New Zealand, and maybe you can also bring it in with regards to what is the future for the community in the UK if this kind of atmosphere continues.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me this evening. Assalamu alaikum to you and your listeners. I suppose my thoughts and prayers are with the families of those that have lost loved ones today, and a community in New Zealand which is grieving. But it probably will confuse some people or shock some people to say that I'm not shocked that this has happened. For a very, very long time, I've been saying that if we hear toxic debates and hateful words, then eventually they inspire people to commit violence. And that's what we've seen today. And we've seen from the manifesto that was published by the terrorist that he was inspired by events from around the world, including hateful writings and words from people in the United Kingdom. And again, this is a repeat of what we saw in Norway with Anders Breivik.
Yes.
Now, I grew up in the 80s and in the 90s where I was a racial justice campaigner. And so in many ways, I see the pattern and the attitudes that we had to fight in terms of racial justice now taking hold in terms of religious discrimination, and it's something that I've been speaking about for well over a decade. You'll recall that in government, it's one of the very first speeches that I gave back in 2011 when I said that Islamophobia had passed the dinner table test. And what I meant by that, and what I said at the time, was that it was now found in the most respectable of settings. So it wasn't just the thug on the streets, which of course is vile and nasty, but at least that's identifiable. But actually it was in more sophisticated surroundings. It was in editorial newsrooms. It was in political policy think tanks. It was in the corridors of power. And that's why I said that we needed to make sure that we drive this out. And at the time, you'll recall that I was roundly criticised, predominantly from the right of politics, but also from the left at the time, to say that there was no such evidence that Islamophobia was widespread. And here we find, 8-9 years on, really the statistics, the polling, the academic data on this, indeed the attacks now show that absolutely this is a widespread problem. Which is perpetuated at the top and manifests itself in the form of violence as we've seen today.
Jazakallah for that, Baroness Warsi. I mean, some of the commentators are actually saying that it's not just a case of Islamophobia, and as we said, it's across the political spectrum. You said it's past the the dinner table test, and you say that it's endemic in the media, in the institutions. It's endemic in terms of the politicians, but it's actually not. It's not just constrained within Islamophobia, but it's a failure of almost the Western system and almost the ideology, because when it comes to secularism, and when we see now the migrants, whether we see the Muslim community, whether we see the blacks previously, the Irish before that taking the blame for the problems that the system hasn't been able to solve, right? So they just push the blame on these individuals, and it's an easy way of getting away with it. So we've failed politically, internationally. Let's blame on the Muslims and the Muslim community.
Well, look, communities across the world have always found somebody to scapegoat. So this is not just something that's a Western problem. I mean, you only have to look across the world and see that people kill in the name of religion, kill in the name of ideologies and hate across the world. I suppose what I'm interested in as a British citizen is that having grown up through an era where I felt that we had started to really push back against racism, and although we still had challenges, but I felt there was a direction of travel. It was the right direction of travel, and that racism would eventually become a thing of the past in the United Kingdom. But what we've seen, actually, tragically, is that we've seen the rise of this new form. You know, we haven't dealt with racism, and yet we've seen the rise of this new form of racism, deliberately targeted at Muslim communities. Yeah. And even if you look at far-right campaigning now, in the way that it was so blatantly racist in the past, you now find even far-right groups will have members of other communities, even members of other races, as part and parcel of their movements. And so there is a very specific and pernicious form of racism, which I define as Islamophobia, which I think we have to be, first of all, we have to start to acknowledge and say that this exists. Secondly, we have to call it out when we see it, and I've seen it in my own party, and I've consistently been calling it out and challenging my colleagues and asking them to have a formal inquiry into this to make sure that we root it out of the Conservative Party. Yes. But of course, challenge the media. I mean, I've been doing that today when people have been showing their sympathy for what's happened in the Christchurch attack, and I've been calling out those commentators, opinion writers, media people who spend their time feeding this beast, which we're now seeing manifest in the form of violence.
Okay, Baroness Warsi, Jazakallah, thank you very much for those comments. I just want